Hi everybody, Pastor Tim here from Calvary Church in Pueblo, Colorado, and this is the message recap, rewind, and bonus features from the sermon that we saw out of Judges 15 on June 27th, this past weekend. Now in Judges 15, we were looking at the life of Samson, and this is another scenario in Samson's life where he felt compromised, and he definitely overreacted. He had a lot of things going through his mind about the wife that he had left and abandoned, and freaked out basically when he came back to his wife, assuming that she would still be there, but she was remarried. And he had issue with the Philistines, and so he decided to take his anger and frustration, his overreacting, out on the Philistines, destroyed their crops and field through a miracle of getting all those foxes together and putting a torch on their tails. And the Philistines reacted and retaliated by killing Samson's former father-in-law and former betrothed wife, killed them with fire. Samson flees, and the Philistines decide, we need to get Samson once and for all. So they come into the land of Israel, into the tribe of Judah, and threatens them. And Judah, instead of standing up as God's people with God as their God, capitulates, hides, and basically goes, okay, we'll give you Samson if you leave us alone. So they seek out Samson. They find Samson and Judah, his own people. They have a dialogue in which they come to the conclusion, if you promise not to hurt Samson, Samson will go with you, and you can bind him up with these ropes. And so Samson did that, and Judah did that. 3,000 people from Judah came to get one Samson. So Judah delivers Samson over to the Philistines, and in the process of that, turning them over, the Philistines are super excited. They're shouting in celebration. We're going to get Samson. He destroyed all this property of ours. He's been nothing but a thorn in our flesh. We're going to get him. We finally got him. God miraculously, again, comes upon Samson in a mighty way, and the ropes that were binding him, he just simply breaks off like they were simply nothing. He then picks up the jawbone of a donkey and goes to town on those Philistines, killing 1,000 of their warriors with only a jawbone. The name of that place is Jawbone Hill, and it was known as that throughout all of antiquity in Israel. After that miraculous event, Samson has a moment of quietness, and he ponders to himself and says to God in probably a prayer or basically complaining and whining, Lord, you gave me great victory this day. It's amazing how you have really begun this process of me becoming a judge over Israel and taking the Philistines out of our land finally. But I'm going to die because I'm thirsty and you don't care about me anymore. And God, in a beautiful, wonderful, comforting way, tells him to stop it. He says there's plenty of water. He breaks open a rock, and rock flows out of it, and Samson is satisfied. And the lesson in that, and some of the bonus features to this message, is that we often are in that situation where we see God's great work in our lives, we can recount the things that he's done in our lives, but all of a sudden something happens and we literally freak out, overreact to something small and insignificant, and we think the world is ending, and we think God has abandoned us, and we are like Samson and Elijah, as we saw, going, there's no one left. It's just me and I'm going to die. And God has to sometimes quietly and sometimes with great precision slap us out of that hysteria of, oh, me, and remind us to get back to what we're supposed to be doing, which are all of those good works that God has predestined us to do from the beginning of time. We are to forward our steps of resolve. And so we saw some of that in the book of Ephesians in particular, as well as the story of Elijah in 1 Kings. But there's a couple of verses that come to mind that I think should bring us some comfort and challenge. One of those verses is from 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. Listen to what Paul says. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. And we've been seeing that through the book of Judges, especially last week. Samson suffers from a lot of temptations that he succumbs to, that he overreacts to. Samson's a lot like us. And so Paul has to remind us, hey, there's no temptation that you are going to face that other people have not faced in life. Other strong believers, they face that same temptation. Even the heroes of the faith, they faced great temptations, and sometimes they fell to it. And God restored them. And God still points to those heroes of the faith in Hebrews chapter 11 as amazing victors that we should example, not in their sin and falling to temptation, but in their bouncing back and going, God, you're my God. Even though I have fallen, you are my Savior, and I walk and I live for you. So he says, no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with temptation, he will also provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it. God has never promised, once you become a Christian and you give your life over to Christ, you will never have a struggle again. You will never be tempted again. You will never drink to excess or do drugs or look at pornography or fall to the temptation of adultery or lie or steal or curse. He says, but when you are faced with that, there's always a way out. What is that way out? It is as simple and as revolutionary as prayer. When you are faced with that temptation, stop what you are doing and say, God, help. If anything from the book of Judges that we have seen time and time again, when one of God's heroes of the faith begins to fall, they don't cry out for help. They fall, and once they have fallen and hit that pit, then they realize, oh, I need help. But you can, in the moment of falling, say, God, help. And I know that God will answer that call. And he will rescue you from that sin and that temptation. And he will put you on a rock that is higher than yourself. That is Jesus Christ. He will remind you of the forgiveness of sins. He will remind you of the penalty of sin. He will remind you of his grace and mercy and righteousness and truth. He will remind you that you are his child. Just cry out. Cry out at the first sign of that temptation, and he will rescue you every single time. Now, this has just been a recap, rewind, and bonus features of the entire message that we watched last Sunday, June 27th. So if you've not watched that service yet, please do so. Watch the entire service, then come back to this little recap and see if that does not inspire you throughout the week to live greatly for God. I know it will. And I know it will answer questions that you are really honestly struggling with. That's the whole purpose and point of these. So until next time, next weekend when we pick up with Samson again, have a great day. Bye.